Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Van Dyke. I'm an attorney at Cogent Law Group. I want to thank you all for joining this webinar. I'm going to say a few words about myself, but first of all, I want to uh, uh, say a few housekeeping words and then introduce our co-presenter, Danielle Boyle. This presentation is scheduled for an hour. And Danielle and I we anticipate that we'll be speaking for about 45 minutes, and we'd like to leave about 15 minutes for questions. But however, please don't hesitate if you have any questions, to put them in the chat, and we'll either get to them at the end of our conversation or during the conversation. Uh, as many of you here probably know who Danielle Boyle is, she is featured regularly at many of the conferences on cannabis banking. She presents and is a panelist at these conferences on a regular basis, and her experience and perspective is highly sought after at these conferences because she has very much been in the trenches uh, on the cannabis banking front now for about 6 years, which is when Dart Bank started its cannabis banking program. Dart Bank actually has one of the largest, if not the largest, cannabis banking programs in the country, and in fact was recently featured in the Crain's Detroit newspaper. There's a feature article about Dart Bank, and I encourage those on this call to Google that article. It's a very interesting article, and we are delighted to have Danielle with us today. Danielle, do you want to add anything more about your experience and background?
No, thank you, Chris. As Chris said, I'm the specialty banking manager at Dart Bank. I've got about 14 years of banking experience that is focused in the areas of compliance, operation, risk management. Have held several different roles across the bank in different departments. As Chris said, we have a very large program currently supporting customers across 37 states. And with a really high focus on compliance, AML, BSA, and customer service overall. Dart Bank, I'm proud to work for Dart Bank. We've been a community-focused bank, meeting the needs of our local communities and businesses for over 100 years. Dart Bank is committed to doing business with integrity, while remaining engaged and forward thinking for all who communicate with us. The history of Dart Bank is one of forward thinking, dating all the way back to 1930, when Dart was the first financial institution to finance an automobile purchase, which I found very interesting when I came on board. And now, again, as Chris mentioned, the first bank in the state of Michigan to offer services to cannabis-related businesses. I'm very excited to be here today.
Well, Danielle, we're very excited to be here too. And it's so interesting that a small community bank in Michigan, 100 years old, has very traditional ties, but decided to jump in this space, had the confidence to do that, and was, even though a relatively small bank, I think you're 2 billion, just over 2 billion in assets, something like that.
1.3 was
1.3, I'm
the
sorry.
last
Yeah,
I saw.
smaller than I
Yep.
thought, 1.3 billion in assets. But had enough confidence. Its board was progressive enough in its thinking, and its CEO was progressive enough in its thinking, and had the confidence in its senior management and employees to start this program. And they've been doing this, as I said, for 6 years, so it's well established. Been through a couple of exams, at least a few exam cycles, and is here still to tell the tale of its
Yes.
cannabis banking program. So major kudos to Dart Bank for starting its program and expanding its program. Um, a few words about me. I uh, I'm a former financial regulator. I worked for the Maine Bureau of Financial Institutions for 6 years. And during my final year there in 2014, the 2014 FinCEN guidance was issued on marijuana banking. And during that time, we had a lot of questions from our regulated entities about cannabis banking and about the FinCEN guidance. And I was there as a resource for our banks and credit unions in Maine who were interested in learning more about cannabis banking. In late 2014, I jumped ship and started at a financial institution smaller than Dart Banks in southern Maine, and started one of the first cannabis banking programs then. During my interview, when I was still wearing my regulator's hat, during my interview for the job, I asked our CEO whether or not the financial institution had a cannabis program, and a very worried look came across his face because I was still wearing my regulator's hat. And before he answered the question, I gave him much reassurance and told him that I would support such a program. It turns out they had a few cannabis customers, but they didn't really have a very well-developed program. So anyway, I got the offer for the position on the way home from that interview. I think our CEO was somewhat worried that I was going to report back to our superintendent on this. And the rest is history. Our cannabis program grew exponentially. No credit to me for that. It was just that we were the only game in town for cannabis banking. And when I left that institution a year and a half ago to join Cogent Law Group, we were just doing deposit. We were just on the depository side. We were not engaged in lending, but the deposit fees alone accounted for 25% of our total ROA when we left. So it was a very financially successful program that we had. I am now at Cogent Law Group. I have been with Cogent Law for uh, a year and a half, and my primary uh, activities involve advising banks and credit unions across the country on either who are interested in learning more about getting into cannabis banking uh, a cannabis banking program, or maybe have a cannabis banking program already, but are looking to expand into the lending space. Help financial institutions on that front. I've helped a couple of financial institutions who've gotten into a little bit of trouble with their regulators, with their cannabis banking programs, and they've sought my assistance remediating those programs. And I've also helped one financial institution, uh, assisted them in developing efficiencies in their program, but at the same time with a view toward remaining compliant with their programs. So anyway, I am getting messages from Raphael that we've got a bit of a computer bug here. So, but I think Danielle, we're gonna move forward. We've got a lot to talk about, and I don't think we need our slides. So if it's okay with you, we're gonna forge on. Um,
Absolutely.
and the first thing I'd like to talk about with you, Danielle, and I'm gonna kind of let you take the reins here, and I can fill in afterwards. But
Sure.
just in terms of getting the program started, uh, you know, I think one of the key things that's really, really important is getting buy-in from all parts of your bank or credit union. And I'm just wondering if you want to talk about that for a few
No,
minutes.
absolutely. Obviously, the board is the one you want to really have the buy-in. You want to make sure that that communication is, flowing at all stages through the board, that they're aware of what's happening, that they're looking at, you know, why are we entering? What are the opportunities for us to go into this space between the board, senior leadership? Um, and really, that's where it all starts. What's driving us to enter this market? Is it, we're identifying an underserved market? Absolutely, that was part of it in the beginning. Is your bank looking for liquidity? Are they looking, at ways to increase profitability? Really just drive community impact. Those are all the conversations that I believe are happening at that level. Um, from there, there's going to be a lot of different conversations that take place, but one of those, the big ones, is looking at the risk versus reward of entering a new market and a new product line for financial institutions. And when it comes to this space, you have to be mindful that this is still a federally illegal Schedule One substance, that it's illegal at the federal level. Therefore there's a compliance burden that's going to come along with it. There's going to be robust monitoring and auditing that's going to have to take place to make sure, these customers are and clients are compliant. Um, and there's reputational risks that you may have to take into consideration and the board may have to take into consideration. The public may have differing perceptions as it comes to cannabis. Um, and really looking at liquidity, there's a large portion of deposits and fee income that will come in that could potentially play into like a concentration risk. It's all coming in from the same place. So those are a lot of the risks I think that the board is looking at in taking into consideration in the early days of evaluating, is this going to be a good move for our financial institution? Obviously, oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in and say, I think that's what's holding back a lot of banks and credit
Mhm.
unions is knowing what the risks are, and not only knowing what the risks are, but knowing what the more important risks are and what the less important risks are, and making sure that your board understands, is going in eyes wide open
Yes.
in terms of what the risks are. As you mentioned, the fact that cannabis is federally illegal and you're entering into this kind of gray legal area. I think that's really, really important. And not only understanding or prioritizing what those risks are, but also having some understanding about how those risks can be managed and making sure that you have the appropriate tools at hand, whether it's software, whether your BSA department is adequately resourced to handle the compliance obligations associated with cannabis banking. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you
But again,
mentioned
there's rewards too, that's the one thing, like we wouldn't just do it if it was only, everybody the risky side of things. There's a lot of rewards that can come along to your financial institution for getting into this program. You be looking at increased revenue, there's a large industry with the opportunity for, you know, deposits and fee income associated with deposits, driving lending, cash management, really just differentiating yourself and your financial institution in the market, and to show that you can drive some community impact in your area by helping this industry assess banking and help them become transparent and operate transparently and safely with less reliance on keeping cash on hand.
I think that's something that's often very overlooked are the public policy, very compelling public policy reasons for banking cannabis. Uh, that the you mentioned the safely vaulting the money. That's a huge public safety issue. We actually had issues in up here in Maine where unbanked CRBs were being robbed because they had no place to safely vault their money. Uh, Banking the money also creates an environment which encourages fiscal responsibility on the part of CR. I'm going to refer them as CRBs going forward, cannabis-related businesses, to file taxes appropriately. I think most importantly, because of the filing requirements uh, that are needed to support the program, the banks and credit unions are assisting regulators and they're assisting law enforcement. There's an old adage that in order to to regulate appropriately and to enforce laws appropriately, follow the money trail. And with the filing requirements, you are offering a very, very useful tool to regulators and law enforcement. So that's a really very important uh, thing to keep in mind. Danielle, you and I talked about risks a little while ago, and one of the risks is the fact that you're operating in a kind of a legal gray area.
Mhm.
And I know that many banks and credit unions are worried about the fact that there are these potential arguments about aiding and abetting and creating or committing a RICO violation. And as an attorney, I cannot tell anyone on this at this meeting that you're not going to be prosecuted, but I can tell you that because of those very cogent public policy reasons that we've just discussed, I think it's the chances of a state or federal prosecutor going after a bank for banking cannabis, I think the chances of that are remote in the extreme. I don't think any prosecutor is going to make a name for him or herself by doing that. So, and history is on my side. Banks and credit unions have been banking cannabis now for 14, 15 years, and there has not been any any one of them that's been prosecuted. Danielle, I think that the greatest risk really is on the compliance side, that making sure you've got your ducks in a row, and obviously, Dart Bank, you're time tested. You've been through some exam cycles, and that should provide a lot of assurance to your cannabis customers who are out there. Um, I think some of the other considerations you mentioned, managing risk. I think one of the other considerations is not only you getting the board on board, so to speak, which is, as you've pointed out, I think the most important thing because it's their decision at the end of the day, but also getting senior management and employees buy-in. Talk with them, and obviously your CEO has done this. Making sure that there's buy-in right from the top down, and explain to them the public policy reasons that I've discussed for banking cannabis. It's obviously not an altruistic decision; it's a business decision, and so again, explain to them the financial opportunities that you've just mentioned, Danielle, as well. So
Definitely be
getting
open and
buy-in,
transparent.
yeah, be open and transparent about it, right from the top down. Um, and I think the other important thing too is setting expectations early on. I think one of the reasons other banks and credit unions might have failed in this space is because they've set kind of unduly high expectations, or perhaps have been too impatient with uh, their uh, program in terms of thinking that it's going to be highly profitable right from the get-go. There is investment to be made in this, and you do have to take the long view, like Dart Bank has taken, to create a successful program. There's a saying, good things come to those who wait, and I think that's very, very true in the cannabis banking space. You have to bide your time, develop traction, uh, prove to your cannabis customers that you are a trusted financial partner who is not going away, who is fully committed to this space, as is the case with Dart Bank. And if you do all of that, the revenue will follow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, Danielle, let's talk a little bit about defining. You've talked about this a little bit already about defining the objectives. I think that's a really, really important thing to when you're starting your program, in terms of what are the objectives of the program. And you've talked about it a little bit, but do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. One of the big things, is the deposit growth. What's going to come from that, liquidity, if you're going to get customer growth that's going to come with it, which could then, builds your reputation in terms of the expertise and in this specially growing market to attract new customers. And just being able to responsibly service a growing industry, right? So that deposit growth can have an impact on all of those things. The fee income, interest income that could come along if people are lending in this space. Um, but one of the big things, I guess, is making sure you're kind of aligning when you're going through this, you're aligning your objectives with your financial institution's risk appetite and operational capacity. That's one thing I think, that operational capacity is something you have to keep a close eye on, in order to, again, make sure you can live up to the reputation that you have. You've got to be able to have the bodies to support the program and the people. In this industry, it can be, a labor intensive.
Yeah, I'll talk to the operational capacity. I think is key here, and hindsight is always 2020. When I was a general counsel and BSA officer and kind of running the our BSA program, I can remember, interview. I was the person. I myself was the person kind of interviewing our prospective CRBs, and then for 7:30, 8 o'clock, getting in the next morning and drafting up the narratives, and kind of and I realized probably too late that our BSA, we didn't have enough operational capacity, given the fact that we were taking on so many CRBs. So I think it's really, really important to be forward thinking, and to err on the side of hiring earlier rather than later, so that
Mhm.
you have you have sufficient operational capacity. I think that's really, really key. And do you want to talk a little bit about the other resources that your software resources?
Absolutely. So, as you're looking at and trying to address all the different, risks and focus areas that need to come along when you're entering a business or line like this, you know, being able to work smarter and not harder, and understanding that there are different, vendors that you can partner with to help support you in this space. Primarily one of the big ones for us is, the introducing the compliance software that, can really help you, monitor the things that you want to see to reduce the noise and give you just the valuable alerts. helping you monitor, seed to sale tracking. Is there something off with their numbers? Is there any negative news, any kind of regulatory fines? Are they being getting fined for anything? Are they in trouble? Are their licenses are up to date? Having to do that, manually is not a realistic way to go about it, especially if you're trying to scale a program. You will very quickly be overwhelmed. And we've been very lucky to have different partners in the compliance space on both our traditional cannabis operational support team. And then for our BSA program, our BSA team is also utilizing software to give them the important data to monitor these things that are, you know, the high risk
Yeah,
point.
and again, I think it's very, very important to be thinking on that front too, and ensure that you're getting that those needed resources, the software and so forth, before your program gains too much traction. I
Mhm.
think I saw something in the chat about which slide we're on now, and we are on this slide here, and I'm going to now jump topic and talk a little bit about ensuring regulatory expectations are met. Uh, as a former regulator, I can tell you right now that there's a misconception, I think, that if a bank or a credit union gets into the cannabis space, that is somehow going to furrow the regulator's eyebrows. That is not the case. Danielle and I talked about the very cogent, strong public policy reasons for banking cannabis. The regulators, the examiners, they're very, very well aware of those public policy reasons for banking cannabis. Basically, the regulators, what they want to ensure is that the risk is being managed appropriately and that you are following the FinCEN guidance and also, keeping an eye on the state regulations for your cannabis regulators. And the first thing they're going to look at is your policies and procedures to making sure that they're robust enough so that the risk management is sufficient. Uh, they're going to want to make sure that the board is being properly informed of its cannabis program. I'm a big believer in the fact that policies and procedures, they're kind of living organic documents, and they need to grow with the program. And I always used to make even minor amendments to our CRB policies because that was an excuse for me to get in front of the board because the policies need to be approved by the board. And that gave me a kind of a springboard to talk about our CRB program with the board. And of course, that discussion was always minuted in board the board minutes. And that's again one of the very first things that the examiners, regulators will look at are your board minutes. And if they see that the board is being kept fully apprised of its cannabis program, that's a really, really good signal to the examiners and your regulators. And
Absolutely. If
yeah,
I could jump back, Chris,
yeah,
just
please
even a
do.
little, um, to talk a little bit, how important it is to have a comprehensive risk assessment before you're onboarding any of your businesses. One of the key things is there's so many things to keep in mind. In this industry, you want to make sure you've got a contingency plan as well. You don't always want to go into it, you can't go into it and think everything's going to be perfect all the time. You want to be prepared. I'm always a prepare for the worst, hope for the best kind of gal anyways, but you're wanting to make sure that you're preparing for any changes that happen along the way. do you have someone that can help you with a legal review if something drastic changes? How are you going to communicate with your regulators? If there's like a suspension, what if there's a suspension or a modification of the services that you've got to make? And making sure you've got an exit strategy if something big were to happen. What is that clear communication going to look like to your customers? You want to make sure it's a graceful kind of an account closure. You don't want to leave these clients with a bad taste in their mouth. And you want to make sure at the same time you're documenting all of your compliance efforts across the board. As part of your risk assessment, I would also highly recommend, making sure that there's stress testing that's happening, you know, used to adjust your capital reserves or your liquidity planning. If there's a loss of fee income, what happens if there's fines? What happens if we incur a drastic compliance cost that keeps rising? It's going to help the bank if you're doing this on the front end to stay compliant, to protect your reputation, keep your customers' trust and avoid losses from any kind of abrupt exits or enforcement actions, and really just maintain the service continuity for all of your customers and clients. Putting in the work in the front end is going to pay off.
Yeah, Danielle, that risk assessment is key. And that is something that, we talked early on in our conversation about, identifying the risks and how those risks can be mitigated. That should be the start of your risk assessment right there if you're starting a program. And you know, it can either be a separate risk assessment or part of your overall risk assessment. But that risk assessment is, again, one of the very, very key documents that your examiners are going to be looking at. And you've also mentioned the strategic plan, making sure you've got, and that should, having an exit strategy in place in case things go pear-shaped or, the FinCEN guidance, is only a guidance. I think, again, the chances of that being rescinded are remote in the extreme, given the fact that we have close to 40 states who have cannabis programs. But having an exit strategy and may perhaps incorporating that as part of your strategic plan, I think is really, really important. The other thing I want to talk about regarding your regulatory considerations are, what is the bank's or credit union's overall relationship with your regulator? Is it a healthy relationship? Is it do you have an open dialogue with your federal or state regulators? And in terms of communications with your regulators, you don't need to get permission from your regulator to start a cannabis banking program. But as a matter of comedy and courtesy, I think it's a good idea to let them know that you're going to be starting one. And this is the game plan that you have in mind. You're not going to get a stamp of approval for them for doing that. Chances are you won't even hear from your regulator about it. But it is a courtesy to let your examiner know if you're interested in getting into this space. And it would also be a courtesy to let them know if you decide to expand your cannabis banking into lending or into other states. I think it's a very, very, I think it's a very, very important thing to show respect to your regulators, and that's a very good way of demonstrating that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
so
just to talk a little bit to that too, with those open communication and dialogue with your regulator, it's like it says, it's like they're going to have expectations there that you are doing certain things if you're in this space. So being mindful of those things, they're going to want to know who's overseeing this, who's responsible for what. Um, they're going to want to know that you know how to identify the risk, assess it, measure it, how to mitigate and control the risk, documenting your policy, your procedures, what controls you're going to put in place to reduce any kind of additional risk that's put on the bank from entering this space. They're going to want to know that you're monitoring. How are you reporting on this? And at the end of the day, probably the most important thing I can say for as what we've learned along the way is make sure you're documenting everything along the way. Um, One of our BSA team once said to me, if you haven't documented it, it didn't happen. So making sure that you're giving yourself credit for all the work you're doing to monitor and help keep these customers compliant.
Absolutely. And just adding on to that, if you're changing your program for whatever reason, perhaps relaxing it, there should always be a why attached to that. And that, as you've just pointed out, Danielle, that needs to be documented as well. What's the why? What is the reason why you've
Mhm.
changed your program or expanded your program? There are again, getting into the if financial institutions are interested in getting into the lending space, there might be a greater comfort level with that now that if you've been in the cannabis depository space for a number of years, you've gotten to know your cannabis members or customers better, and you've been viewing their financials for a number of years. So that's always documenting the why for any changes, I think is very important. The other point I want to make regarding the policies and procedures that Danielle was just talking about is making making sure that it's very clear who has who has the authorities. Your BSA officer really is a key person here, and there is always going to be this tension in banks and credit unions between profit and fulfilling your regulatory responsibilities, and in particular, in this case, your BSA responsibilities. And there are, the chances are there are going to be some CRBs that you take on that from a risk perspective, just become they're not fulfilling their compliance obligations. They feel the bank or credit union is being too intrusive. Why do you want all of this information? They're not being cooperative, or Danielle mentioned the negative news that could come across that the financial institution could become aware of. Um, and so it really, at the end of the day, the BSA officer obviously should consult with their staff and consult outside as well. But it is the BSA office. I maintain that it's the BSA officer's decision about whether or not to ultimately make a termination filing against a CRB. And that should always trump the financial institution's financial incentive for keeping a uh, a CRB, and that risk is that conflict is heightened even more so if a financial institution gets into the lending space, because then you've created a very sticky relationship. I know we're not here talking about cannabis lending, but I'll just say this, and that is, if for financial institutions interested in getting into onto the lending space, you're going to want to choose the cream of the crop uh, for your uh, for your CRB borrowers to mitigate that risk as much as possible. Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about pricing considerations?
Oh, absolutely. So obviously once you've got your board buy-in, you've developed your policies, your procedures, and everything's kind of being put together, pricing is something that you can't leave out of that mix. It's important that you're understanding the market need and the environment that you're in, and that can be different from state to state, whether you're starting a program strictly in the state you're in, or as Dart Bank has done, expanded into different states and markets. You got to be aware of the regulatory landscape that's happening there. Is this state just coming on board? How many licenses are out there? That's a great opportunity for you. That's a strong market. Or you have Michigan where, it's saturated, and the pricing is, per for product is going down. Things are going to change as the industry is emerging, growing, and saturated. So being mindful of all of those things. Um, you know, making sure that pricing these, one of the biggest things is you have to price to be able to sustain your program. You can't, you need to analyze all the costs that are associated with this. So, there's a bunch of different methods that you could go. Are you going to do a tiered pricing? Are you going to look at like a base cost plus for additional services, or you're going to do an all-inclusive fee? And what does that include? I think the most important thing that I can't stress enough really is making sure that you're taking into consideration all, not just, your software and the day-to-day stuff, but that you're looking at what is your compliance overhead going to be? It's that um, technology, staffing, is there an additional cost due to the risk exposure? For us, there's different departments whose time is all factored into this. It's not just a one department, that you need to take into consideration. You've got people from all corners of the bank, you've got accounting, BSA, the customer service side of things. You've got the relationship managers building the relationships, treasury support services, and frontline staff who are going to be maybe counting the cash as it comes in. So keeping those things in mind. Keep in mind that you may need to add to staff due to the increased number of SAR filings that you have to complete as your program's growing. That you know the vendors. So an armored car carrier, you've got to have some sort of a relationship with them. What is the cost for that? How much is your compliance software? Is there extra insurance that's needed? All of those things need to be kind of taken into consideration as you're starting to really develop what is a common sense pricing strategy. And you don't want to give yourself, you know, you have to give yourself room to wiggle, because especially as your market gets more mature, as you see um, more FIs coming into the space, there has been a tendency to be a big price compression, to say, oh, we can give you all of these services for so much less. Well, that's wonderful, but what you really need to understand is, are they going to be able to sustain that pricing? Is that program going to be around in 1-2 years with what they're charging you? Or are you going to have to find another FI because they're going to determine that they have to exit the space?
Yeah, that's another really key uh, regulatory consideration too. Is the as you've mentioned, Danielle, is the program financially sustainable? And it's tough now in this market because there is competition, and FIs, they do need to kind of hit this sweet spot of making sure that their program is financially sustainable, that the costs associated, the fees associated with the cannabis accounts are covering all of those costs that Danielle mentioned, both the tangible ones, the for software and staffing, but also the intangible ones, the risk, and that's kind of a hard thing to monetize. Uh, but then at the same time, you know you want to make sure that you're being competitive with other FIs that are in this space. And I think one of the really important things is, and Danielle's mentioned this, the you know the fact that the it's the fact that you have a program that has weathered several years of oversight from regulators. That means a lot to that should mean a lot, I should say, to cannabis customers. And if you are being offered cannabis accounts from another FI and the fees are incredibly low, or I've even heard of some FIs offering cannabis deposit accounts at no fee. That to me is a red flag. That to me tells me that that FI is probably going to be that CRB's last boyfriend or girlfriend. That they do not have a financially sustainable program. It's funny because from a regulatory perspective, the fee pressure is almost flipped 180 degrees. Because financial institutions are um, under pressure in other areas to lower fees. But here, the financial regulators want to make sure that your CRB fees are sufficient enough so that the program is sustainable and isn't going to go away in a couple of years. So that's very, very important. Competitors. There's no shame in looking around to see what your competitors are charging and what services they're offering. Uh, but it's not just about pricing, is it, Danielle? It's also about service and creating a positive affinity with the uh, with the CRB. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how Dark
Yeah,
succeeded on that?
absolutely. So while you want, all of those things you need to take into consideration for pricing and you're wanting to grow your book and your portfolio, there is something to be said for making sure you are putting yourself in the best place to attract the right customers. Um, you're wanting to build relationships, not just quick accounts. You want to understand your customers. What are they doing? What's normal? So you can help add value to their business. Um, maybe you can provide some educational resources to them. You can support by introducing them to, different centers of influence, or even marketing your program if you choose to do so through those kind of centers of influences and trusted programs. These customers, you know, there's value for them in having a trusted relationship with a CPA or an attorney or consultants. Utilize those relationships both ways to develop and onboard those trusted relationships.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The fact that, banks and credit unions, they're going to have a pretty intrusive relationship with their CRBs just because of the compliance burdens, but that can be turned into a positive thing. You can create some positive affinity with that. And as long as the CRBs are aware of the fact that, your bank or credit union, they're going out on a bit of a limb, taking on this risk, but it's required. It's required of them because of the FinCEN guidance. At the same time, that can create a very positive and close relationship. And as I mentioned before, it could also um, create an opportunity down the road, perhaps, depending on the financial institution's risk appetite for offering lending. As I said before, there are additional risks associated with that, which need to be taken into account. But that's another kind of a positive aspect about this kind of intrusive relationship is that you're gonna be pretty well versed in the uh, in the CRB's financials because of the ongoing due diligence requirements and monitoring. Danielle, let's move on and talk a little bit about department structuring. I know you and I talked about this a little bit before. And I think we had kind of a similar structuring, but a little bit different too. Why don't you talk about how it's structured at Dart Bank?
Yeah, I think there's definitely different approaches across the industry. Um, some banks I've heard have their cannabis program lives pretty much solely within their BSA department. There's really no right and wrong so long as you're doing all the things you need to do along the way. Um, for example, our bank has a dedicated cannabis compliance team. They have a relationship management team. So we really do have a whole department that's dedicated to serve these clients, to protect the bank, to assist BSA. BSA still, like you said, Chris, has the ultimate say. They're the ones that can say, you know, no, we cannot move forward with this relationship, or I think we need to file a termination SAR on this. That you've got to have that relationship outlined, kind of who's gets to make what call. But along the way, for you just need to understand your needs and the resources that you've got there. That you've got the right staffing that can complete the enhanced due diligence that's required with these customers on an ongoing basis. People to work, your transaction monitorings, the BSA side, see increased CTRs, increased SAR filings. Um, those are all kind of really key pieces, no matter how you decide to structure your team. I think, again, no matter which way you structure it, there's a need for that cross-departmental collaboration between the compliance and the operations, BSA, legal, to really feel you've got the robust program. You need to be able to have those ongoing conversations, and you need to, from the relationship manager side of things, have the capacity for, a high touch service to these customers with lots of onboarding support to get them across the line. Um, and I think you need to advocate for whichever way you set up your program to make sure that you're getting the training you need and you've got the certifications that go along with these specialized roles, because they're now way more than there ever used to be. There are educational tools to help get you up to speed in this space where before there was not many.
That's right. We were all just kind of learning it ourselves.
Yeah. Yes.
And we were teaching the examiners, and the examiners were teaching us. It was a kind of a weird mix in the early days of cannabis banking for me, anyway.
Hmm.
The one thing, again, I always harken back to regulatory perspectives, and one of the things that the regulators are going to want to ensure is that there is some degree of separation between your business services department, uh, the folks who are kind of the front-facing part of your cannabis program, and then your back end people, the folks who are doing the SAR filings and so forth, because the regulators want to make sure that there's no conflict of interest there. Uh, I think when you're on the front end and you're servicing CRBs on an ongoing basis, you by necessity developed a kind of a close business relationship with them. But on the filing side, on the SAR side, you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at the transactions, and you're determining whether or not there's something unusual or suspicious here, and objectively suspicious and unusual here, that may warrant an elevated SAR filing. And that's a decision that should be made by your back end BSA department. And as I said before, there has to be adequate communication, as Danielle pointed out a moment ago, between departments. Uh, when I was running our program, we had a weekly meeting, a preordained weekly meeting on Wednesday mornings, with our business services department, our back end BSA department, and our front end BSA department, just to make sure that everyone was on the same page regarding our feelings, our level of comfort with our CRBs, and whether this was an appropriate CRB, for instance, to offer a smart safe to, or because they were wholly compliant and cooperative with us in terms of the information they were providing to us, or maybe they weren't. Uh, and again, talking about the lending side, I've always been an advocate of carrots for compliance. That if an institution is going to consider cannabis lending, that it, I would say shouldn't really jump into the cannabis lending space right away. Again, this I would advocate for a position of ensuring that the CRB has developed a really good track record with your FI on the depository side, on the compliance side, on the information sharing side, and making sure that they're a good underwriting risk too, and with the financials. And there are other software companies out there that can provide enhanced comfort on the underwriting side too. So those are my thoughts regarding, structuring the program, and as Danielle, so rightly pointed out, making sure you're ahead of the ball game when it comes to staffing, and that you don't find yourself under-resourced, so that you do a late filing, for instance. That's really, really low-hanging fruit for an examiner, is if you miss a CTR, or miss a one of those SARs that have to be reported on an ongoing basis, and also making sure that you've got adequate staff so that your SARs are, complete and accurate all the time. Because again, that's really a very, very low hanging fruit for an examiner. We are coming up to our hour. The only last thing I want to mention is ensuring that you have a sufficient internal audit program. And internal doesn't is kind of a misnomer, because you can, at my financial institution, we did have somebody who did some internal audit for us, who was an employee of the FI, but we also used an outside firm for that too. So really important that you have an adequate audit program. Danielle, I don't know if you want to say anything about that or not.
No, it's all the same. It's just making sure that you have the audit program, an external, internal audit, someone who's can do independent reviews of some of your policy and procedure adherence. And I guess ultimately at the end of the day, take that feedback that comes from those and use it to drive, one, continuous improvement of your program, but two, to circle it right back up to loop it right back up to the board. The board should be hearing about the feedback and any kind of finding or recommendation that comes along from the auditors. That's the way to, again, ensure that full circle moment, that the board is still maintaining good oversight, understanding of how the program's running, and maybe improvements that need to be made along the way.
Okay, Danielle, thanks so much for all those insights. I want to be very respectful of people's time. So I think we should probably end it there. And I'm just looking through the chat box to see uh, what questions we have. So let's just see here. Okay, all right. Much of this is Raphael. I'm not actually seeing questions from folks. I always pride myself on being very available for folks. If folks have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email, if it wasn't on the slide, is cvandyke@cogentlaw.com. And my cell phone number is 207-844-0196. Please feel free to give me a call. I may not be able to get back to you right away, but feel free to leave a message. Um, and Danielle, again, thank you for all your time. Oh, the last thing I want to point out is that if any financial institution out there is interested in a free half-hour session on the risks associated with cannabis banking, I am more than happy to present that free of charge, no obligation, either to your senior management and or your board. So please feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in that. Again, I'm a former regulator, so I can kind of speak to it from a regulatory perspective, and I can talk to you about in a little bit more detail about what I perceive are the more important risks and what the less important risks are, and how you can manage your program so that those risks are adequately taken into account.
Hey, Chris, Danielle, there are 3 questions in the Q&A section.
Okay.
Perfect. Maren, it looks like the one for you, what would the banking experience look like to a customer? We obviously aim for it to be as seamless as possible. With that being said, there's usually a separate application process that's involved for our cannabis related clients. We need to know about you. We need to know about your business. We need to understand, what your needs are from a services perspective and what the activity in your account is going to look like. And what that does is by providing us all of that information on the front end, it allows us to process that application and better understand what's normal for you in your bank account. And the better we understand you, the fewer phone calls that you get from a compliance team saying, hey, can you help me understand? We know most of the time you're going to tell us what it is and it's going to make total sense. But sharing that information up front on an application that's provided is always helpful. There's going to be, it's not going to be an overnight process to onboard a customer. It does take a little bit of time, again, to get through the processes of approval. But once those steps take place, banking for you should feel very much like day-to-day banking out of your personal account. You should have access to the services and the products that you need to operate your business. You should be able to, whether that's an armored car partnership that's delivering your cash that also has a connection with your bank. We have a lot of our customers who are located in other states. They have an armored car partner that picks up their cash and takes it directly to the Fed. And then we get a report that says, hey, we have this cash, go ahead and credit the customer. It can be pretty seamless. So yes, you'll get some calls asking for updates on things from time to time, but other than that, it should feel very seamless.
And I should add that if anyone needs any assistance with any documentation, their onboarding documentation, policies and procedures, I mean, this has kind of been my bread and butter now for 12 years. I would be more than happy to assist with that. In addition, to presenting to board and senior management. There's a lot. There's a lot to take into account when you're setting up a program, and I'm gonna, I can kind of fast track that for folks if they're looking for assistance. So please feel free to reach out to me on that front.
And in terms of checklist for logistics, Maren, I would encourage you to reach out to a bank and they can recommend. A lot of times they'll have armor car and logistical partners that they work with already that you could potentially be able to reach out and they would probably be best to help you look at a checklist or get you all the things that you need to see when you're considering that logistical side of things.
Yeah, there's going to be part of this if you're just setting up a program. There's there's a vendor management aspect to all of this, and you kind of want to make sure that those folks are vetted properly, they're properly insured, and they've got a decent track record too. Some of these vendors, because the program itself is a high risk program, there's a good chance that your vendors will be put into that category too as a high risk vendor requiring kind of enhanced due diligence for those too. And I can assist on that front too. Any other questions? Danielle, you've been better at spotting them than I have.
Yeah, Caitlin, how to find out what competitor pricing is to stay in the competitive lane for prospects and customers. I'm not sure there's a document out there that's going to tell us what everybody's doing. The best thing you can do, I think, in those instances is just start talking to people, whether it's, again, your centers of influence, your attorneys, your CPAs, the people in the industry. They're hearing things from their customers, talking to your potential customers. What are they hearing? And just knowing that matching the low price might not always be the best thing. It's about creating value for your customers and helping them understand that this fee isn't just, the cream on the top for the bank, that this fee goes towards all of the things that are required for us to support this line of business and to be able to continue supporting that line of business. I know it's not a black and white answer, but I think.
No, that's absolutely right, Danielle. I mean, some of these financial institutions may have their cannabis fees on their websites. Most of them, I think, don't, but that's one starting place. Don't I mean, as an attorney, you're really not allowed to do this, but for any non-attorneys, you can have a pretext call and tell them that you're interested in finding about looking for banking partner and want to find out what your pricing is. And so that's there's no shame in doing that either. Don't always I can recall back in the days when I was at an FI that some of the CRBs would complain about our fees and say, well, this financial institution is offering this pricing, and don't always take their word for it. Double check to make sure that that's accurate. So yeah, Danielle's right. There's no magic to that. Just just do a little bit of corporate espionage and but again, make sure the most important thing is make sure that your program is financially sustainable, even if you see that a competitor is offering pricing that just is not realistic. Don't go down that road. Okay.
That's all I see in there, Chris.
Okay. Thanks, Danielle. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. As I mentioned before, please feel free to reach out to me. There's my email at the end. There's a phone number there, but I do want to give you my direct dial number too. It's 207-844-0196. That'll reach me direct. Please feel free to give me a call for anything. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been very, very insightful listening to your remarks, and we're very, very grateful that you were willing to join us with us and to share your thoughts with potential competitors out there. So
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. I'm happy to be
once again, big shout out to Dart Bank for all their success in this space. Great news. Okay, thank you all. Goodbye.